we are told that we can vote our way out of a problem, right? So here's democracy down here. There's institutional democracy, and then there's democracy within society. The problem is we vote in this level thinking we can make a difference, but both leaders are part of institutional democracy.
And boom, we're live. What's up, everybody? Couple Casuals Podcast, episode number 53. Nice. I'm your host, Stefano. And guys, we got a very interesting political conversation for you guys today. My guest today is the creator and host of the Blender Report and Blender News, where news meets rational thinking. He is an entrepreneur. And guys, we're just in for a very, very interesting conversation today. He's one of the good guys. Shining light on a lot of issues we're having here, political issues in particular in Canada and across the world. So with that being said, I want to welcome for a second time, Jonathan Harvey.
One of the good guys.
One of the good guys.
That's the nicest thing you could say about somebody. Thank you.
I had to put that in there.
Appreciate that. And I want to give you credit for memorizing your intro because I don't. I just read it off my phone like a schmuck.
I got to give you the proper opening that you
appreciate it. That's very kind.
Yes. Second time.
Yeah.
You know, a lot has happened.
Yeah, it's nice to be here, man. I love chatting with you. We had a good chat last time.
I appreciate that. And so much has happened since the last time we talked. And one of the things we were just talking about is you're a father now. So I want to firstly open with saying congratulations.
Thank you.
On that,
yes.
man.
Yeah,
how's fatherhood so far?
Amazing. So his name's Jackson Wolf Harvey. It's a strong name.
Yes.
I call him Meatball because he's massive. It's great. I know, it's great. So he's ahead of the curve physically, mentally, all that stuff that you hope for, which is great. He's just super tapped in. He's interested in everything. He's already trying to crawl at 7 months. We take swimming lessons now. He's the only kid that was big enough to need the toddler life jacket because he was so big.
Okay.
Like, let's go. Otherwise, it's been great. It's interesting, right? So one of two things happens if you're a decent human being when you have kids. For men, I don't know about women. Yeah. I think women, it's obviously different. There's a much more maternal instinct. So with men, you either hear them say, wow, the day my baby was born, everything changed. I was just flooded with love and I was crying and all this other stuff. Or it grows over time. I'm the person that it grew over time with. And I chalk that up to preparation. And this may sound silly, but I'm just trying to understand the way my own mind and body works. So because I'm a bit of a planner, I emotionally prepare myself for things that are happening when I know they're going to happen. So for 9 months, even before that, I was ready to have children and I kind of had this. So I prepped myself for the day that it came. And when it came, I definitely had a lot of love for him the day it came, don't get me wrong. But it was like a small uptick from where I already was because I'd been doing sort of this preparatory work. But over the last 7 months, dude, like I can't even explain it. Like I would use my wife as a human shield to protect that baby. Oh yeah, it's what like.
So the love is immense.
It's crazy, and it's just like every day you either get up and see him, he's so excited, he's kicking and just laughing and smiling. We have a very happy baby. We're very lucky. Or you get home from work and it's the same thing. He's just super, super excited, and he just like if he's upset, I just throw him in the air. Everything's good. Your whole perspective changes, and it's interesting. Yes. Like I'm just as motivated. But I'll tell you, one thing that's happened is my timeline has tightened. So I'm like, hey, I'll retire when I'm 60. Now I'm like, I kind of want to retire when I'm 45. I won't ever stop doing stuff in the business and entrepreneurship world. I'm a very active human, but I want to be able to prioritize spending as much time with my family as I want. So that kind of changed. And it's interesting too, like as an entrepreneur, like through the last nearly 20 years of being an entrepreneur, about that, yeah, wow.
It's amazing.
COVID, everything was kind of going up and up and up, and you're learning and getting better, and you're becoming more interested and more efficient, which I think is really important, obviously. COVID hit, and it took a lot of the wind out of my sails and a lot of the money out of my pocket. And that's okay. It happened to a lot of people. But I was feeling a little bit like, hey, the only thing I really know and do is entrepreneurship. I don't really want to work for other people. It's not really my vibe. But I wasn't feeling motivated. Having the kid sort of reinvigorated all that motivation and ambition. It's weird. Like you want to be able to provide more for them. Like obviously my wife's very capable. She does well for herself. We've commingled funds since we met like 20 years ago. But you don't think about it quite the same way. But when you have a kid, you're like, I got to be there for him or her or them. I don't mean that as in a they them. I mean like you have multiple kids. Fuck out of here.
Yes.
So
there's the clarification.
But it really does help you refocus, or it helped me refocus my efforts. So I've had a very, very good 7 months in addition to having such a great addition to my life.
Yeah, I think you laid that out perfectly. It does. It gives you a new perspective. At least that's what everyone says, right? And it's like you said, when it happens, it really shifts on the way you orient, the way you think, your motivation. So I wanted to see if you shared that same message, which definitely it seems like you do. But a lot of people often don't really consider the preparation and stuff that goes into having a kid prior to that. So I love how you sort of implemented that blueprint to like what you do in your daily life to having a kid too, preparing, and then ultimately when that happened, experiencing that feeling of like, okay, this is great. But then you're saying that over time, you just built that love and that realization grew.
I think one of the benefits that I have is I'm a little older. So I think, a lot of people have kids when they're in their 20s and early 30s. I'll be 40 in a few weeks. So I've had more time to sort of process my own emotions and become a better man on my own time. But also because I've been an entrepreneur for so many years, I'm of the opinion you sort of grow in experience and emotional capacity beyond your years if you are an entrepreneur, because you're sort of forced to. You're in situations that most people couldn't stomach. Especially going through something like COVID, losing all those businesses and stuff, which again, I'm cool with it, but it's just like, here's the way I see it. When you look at most people, the amount of stress that they're willing to take on a daily basis is probably a 3 or a 4 out of 10. As an entrepreneur, you have to be willing to take on at least a 6 every day, minimum. And quite often it gets higher and higher depending how things are going within your business and what's going on. So when you're used to that level of stress, it definitely comes with some health effects that you learn to mitigate or to manage and stuff like that. But it prepares you for life in a very, very different way. And you have to explore emotions that most people don't get access to. Most people don't get themselves in those situations because they're unwilling, because it's uncomfortable. So if you are passionate enough about being an entrepreneur, it comes with those lessons. And I think those lessons then sort of translate again into your sort of emotional capacity. So I think when you take the fact that I'm nearly 40 and just the many years I've had as an entrepreneur, and I'll be honest, anybody that has been a successful entrepreneur knows they've had many years of failure. So you take that and you combine those two things, and I just feel like I'm as prepared to be a dad as I probably could have been. So I think that's helped.
That's amazing. And yeah, the ingredient really is failure to breed the really resilience in an individual. But a part of it, you talked about preparation and and COVID too. I want to collide those worlds right now and ask you a little bit about when you have a kid, you have to consider vaccines, right?
Yes.
And we were talking a little bit before pod. I kind of want to unpack that further, because I think this is a question that, especially following COVID, people are really starting to question, like, wait, what am I putting in my child? So what's your opinion on it?
Well, what I would say is that the people not vaccinating their children has skyrocketed exponentially in Canada and the US. Before I kind of get into some of the more objective things that I could point out that I think make them a problem or something to be conscious of, is I really got to blame governments and big pharma for what they did with the mRNA vaccines, because that's what made people hesitant or reticent about all of the other ones. They just kind of went, wait a minute, if you guys did all this stuff, forced this down our throats, or in our arms, I should say, rather, you lied to us. It was 1 and done, then 2 and you're through, then 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. I don't know how many they're giving people. Now they're putting it on the childhood schedule, which is insane to me. So you look at how that went, and you look at all the people that were legitimately harmed. And there are a number of cases and some really, really good data out now that prove this. One of them, which was pretty alarming to me, was that of all the kids, this was a massive study. It was over 1 million. It could have been as many as 2, but it was over 1 million kids. And I believe they were all under 18. It might have been a 13 to 17 cohort, but they were all under 18. Of all of them tested, the only ones that got myocarditis were the ones that were vaccinated. Not one kid who was unvaccinated got myocarditis who got COVID. So you kind of look at this, you go, that's scarring on your heart. That doesn't go away. Like they harmed a lot of people in the interest of making money. That's my opinion.
What it is.
Yeah. And here's the thing. I think the reason that they were able to do this is because there's no liability on them whatsoever because of the Reagan administration. I believe it was in '86. They passed some policy in the United States that basically gave them zero liability for vaccine injury. And I know that there is kind of like a vaccine court that happens on the side, but from my understanding, that's government funding that deals with that, not really the pharmaceutical companies. So what they said in the '80s, where they go, look, it's an inherently dangerous business. And instead of him saying, well, why don't you just create safer vaccines? I think it was the other way around. Basically, they're dangerous. He said, why don't you create safer vaccines? And they go, well, it's an inherently dangerous business. We need this coverage, or we're going to stop. And is how things kind of shook out. So since the mid-'80s, you haven't needed to worry about safety testing for vaccines. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't work. Like, I'm not a scientist. That doesn't mean they don't work. I don't want to go down that line because I can definitely be attacked and people know a lot more than I do about these things. But here's what I would suggest. If you look at the number of vaccine injuries people are having from the mRNA stuff, maybe do some research, look into it and see what you think about everything else.
So where do you do the research? That's my first question.
Well, I think it's interesting. So it's difficult to find some things online, but you can find the right groups and the right forums.
Okay.
And you can locate some of this information. You can follow some people on Instagram or other channels that are doctors, not idiots like me, people that actually know what they're talking about. There's a reasonable amount of data out there. You just have to do some digging. But here's the thing that I would say. If you want to find the information badly enough, you will find it.
Right.
You can locate it. So the big problem I have is that they've added so many things to the children's vaccine schedule that are unnecessary, like hepatitis. So you get hepatitis through it's a sexually transmitted disease or from sharing needles. Why does a 6-month or even a 2-year-old need a hepatitis vaccine? Because the thing is, when was the last time you were vaccinated?
I literally don't
Right.
remember.
So
Maybe when I was a small child.
Pretty much every vaccine has a life cycle, a maximum life cycle of 10 years. So if you don't get boosters when you're 10 or 12, then you're not vaccinated against anything anyway.
Right.
So what are we talking about here?
So they're injected with them, but then scientifically at a certain point that needs to be
Exactly.
re-injected.
It's ineffective, but then you go back to the hepatitis one. The significant majority of children do not have sex before they're 12 years old. So they have this vaccine in them that is complete, or have dirty needles in their arm. So this is completely useless. So you got to ask yourself, why is it there? Well, it's because they make billions of dollars on injecting them into people. They don't have to do any marketing, and it's pretty much, quote unquote, mandatory. It's not, but you know what I mean? You got to jump through hoops if you want your kid to go to school without them, and et cetera.
Yes,
So
that's the question, right? Is they won't let you in
they will.
schools with
They
certain,
will.
They will.
You just have to do the paperwork. You just have to go through the right channels, but they will, right? And like I said, a lot more families are not vaccinating their kids anymore. But here's my thing. If they're so good and they're so safe and they're not correlated to any of these issues like autism or anything like that, okay, let's say they're not, then why won't they do safety testing for them? That's all RFK is looking for. RFK wants safety testing so they meet the minimum standard that all other medications that are working, shouldn't say all other, but all other medications in that level are working their way through the FDA, Health Canada, everything like that. You just have to go through the same safety testing. If you're unwilling to do that, how can anyone stand behind these products if they're unwilling to go through that process? Because RFK and people like me and maybe even people like you, I'm not saying they should go away. I'm not saying you shouldn't use them. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have the choice to do whatever you want. But I do think society at large would benefit from them being tested for safety.
Yes.
No?
I didn't even realize that all of them were literally...
Anything on the childhood vaccine schedule does not have to be tested for safety.
And do we know at this point, just lastly here, do we know at this point how many are on that rollout for when you have a baby?
Okay, so I might be bang on or I might be in the right ballpark, but I'm going to be close. So when I was young, I was born in 85. I've already dated myself, so that's cool. I believe I had 16. And now kids get, from what I understand, 72.
That's a crazy increase.
So now let me say this though, because again, I'm not sure that they're getting a massively increased number of them. Sure, COVID's on there. There may be a couple of other things in there, but I think what they're doing, it's the volume that they're giving them and how many more they're giving them over time. So I think that they're either stretching the schedule or just giving them a higher volume of them over a longer period of time. So, there's a couple arguments you can make, and one of them is the ingredients they use to activate a lot of these vaccines. So there's something in vaccines that sort of kickstarts your immune system, and it's an aluminum derivative. It's a metal in your body. So, there's an argument to be had that it's less about maybe the ingredients in the vaccination and more so about the delivery method that's actually causing more problems. Again, why aren't we testing these things? So, look, most of the things kids are getting vaccinated for aren't problems for healthy kids. They're just not. And there's this whole theory of like, well, your kid wasn't vaccinated, so you're the problem. It's like, well, if your kid was, then he should be fine, right?
Yes. And that was sort of through COVID, wasn't that the argument, right? Initially, it was. Initially, they said, if you get the vaccine, you won't spread the disease.
This is a big gap in the sort of story on the vaccine side, right? Is they work so well, then why do both of us need them? If they work so well, why do both of us need a prophylactic? That doesn't make any sense. If it works so well, then you should be fine. Don't worry about what I do with my time.
I mean, you saw how they changed the narrative throughout time, right? They said you can't you can't get COVID and you can't spread it if you're vaccinated, and then they had to shift that messaging, which it's to your point earlier. That's some of the reason, or partly maybe majority of the reason on why people are starting to be reluctant on getting vaccines or just reluctant in general in the trust of government.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, here's what I would say. I'm not an expert. I've done a significant amount of research. Anybody that's followed me through COVID knows that I was very tapped in.
Right.
And I started studying, researching rather, a lot of the vaccination stuff back in 2015, way before all this shit happened. My wife and I were going back and forth on it. So we went down a rabbit hole pretty deep there. I think people should just make sure that they're informed.
Okay.
Make sure you know what's happening. Make sure you know what's going into your kids' arms. Make sure you know what's in them. Make sure you really do understand like this informed consent thing. Make sure you do have all the information. Because a lot of times when we're talking about COVID vaccines, the doctors didn't really know. They couldn't inform you properly. It was impossible.
Yeah.
So do what's right for you. Don't listen to me. But do your own research. It's so funny. They vilified people for saying do their own research, but it's like a tagline on Elmo's World, which I watch a lot of Sesame Street these days because of my kid. They're like, what do we do? We don't know something? We look it up. Okay, great. But now they tell you not to look it up when it comes to stuff like this. Fuck all that. Look it up. Yeah. Do your research. Figure some things out. Ask some questions. Be willing to face these tough conversations, because I think what happens a lot of times is people are unwilling to actually approach these conversations with friends or with doctors because they're afraid of being ostracized.
That's right.
That's how well they've done with this propaganda.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, the people pushing these are pharmaceutical companies. They've been sued more than any other industry in the world by a significant margin. They are not your friend. They are definitely doing better when you are not well. So pay attention to that. That's kind of where I would leave it, I think.
Yeah, there was a consensus, like the distrust for the FDA, for the pharmaceutical industry, with the opioid crisis, all these things prior to COVID. Then COVID happened, and all of a sudden everybody was like, they're our best friend. We must trust them. So
that was a great campaign.
Yeah,
that was great. Good propaganda,
marketing
boys.
Of the
Good
century,
job.
right?
And it's just too bad too when you look at how our regulatory agencies are captured, like the FDA, and how much of their funding comes from big pharma. You're like, how does this make any sense? How are you people not seeing the conflict of interest here and ask any questions? And instead, they don't dig in. They don't do any research. They just tell you that you're they vilify you with some derogatory tone. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So.
And one of the guys who did that is none other than our buddy Justin Trudeau.
Yes.
So I think that's where we kind of go now. Is a lot has happened, like I said, since we last spoke, but a lot has happened just in most recent times. So the timing of this conversation couldn't be any better.
Yeah.
Because I have so many questions just for you, because your just intellect and your ability to navigate these conversations are awesome. So starting out, let's just talk about it. Let's get your opening thoughts. January 6th, Justin Trudeau finally resigned. What are your thoughts on it?
He took the coward's way out.
Okay.
In life, you have to choose between two bad options sometimes, and he had two bad options to choose from, right? Resign or vote of non-confidence. He knew it was coming, right?
Right.
So he goes, okay, I'm going to resign, because this way in the history books, I'm the prime minister that lasted 10 years, then resigned because it was better for Canada, because I did all the work that I could. That's the story he's telling himself. So he takes that path. What he does from that point forward is then he prorogues government, shuts it down until March 24th effectively. And then in that time, they're going to have a new leader elected. My opinion, it'll be Mark Carney. We can talk about that after. But what he's also done is he's given the Liberals time to negotiate with the NDP or the Bloc to maintain power. So there will not be a vote anytime soon. It will not be until at least October.
Really?
No chance. So all they need to do is maintain basically the majority. How do you do that? Well, basically like they had an agreement with the NDP. And now Jagmeet Singh's basically already come out and supported Mark Carney. So what he's going to do is Mark Carney's going to go to the NDP and goes, what kind of ridiculous, dumbass policy do you want me to help you pass so that I can maintain power for the next 6 months? Because I'm going to need it to try to rebuild my brand equity. So that's what Carney's, in my opinion, Carney Freeland, but I think it's going to be Carney. That's what the Liberals are going to do over the next 6-8 months. And Trudeau's just going to kind of slowly fade away into the background, and then whatever. And he's going to write his own book about how great he was and maybe go take a job at the UN. That's what I think is likely to happen.
Holy fuck, man. You just blew my mind there for a second. Because I was predicting that it was probably, and that was going to be what I wanted to talk about, was when this election was going to be. But that is a great point. So, and I definitely could see Jagmeet Singh doing that, because he's the one who propped up the government for the longest time. Then with the best part, withdrew his confidence in the government. Then when it went to a non-confidence, voted for Trudeau again to prop him up again. Yes. So just... what the hell is going on in Canadian politics?
Well, it's basically 41 million people are being held hostage by 3 weak men, right? That's really what's happening. You've got Blanchet, you've got Singh, and you've got Trudeau. That's what's happening. Because here, think about it this way. I mean, Blanchet with the Bloc is just whatever, because the Bloc's always going to be what the Bloc is. They're going to get their votes because Quebec is its own little vibe. Cool. But they're basically inconsequential. They make it so that we always have at least a 3-party system, if not 4, right? That's kind of what they're going to do. Cool. Trudeau has got the most power in the country. Who's got the next most power in the country? Who's next highest in the list? Really is Jagmeet Singh right now, right? Because he's essentially the kingmaker. Without him, Trudeau didn't have power. So these two guys had an incredible amount of power, but if they split apart, they become vulnerable and weak. So everything was about how can I suit myself? What can I do for my party and what can I do for me? Really is what this was about. Whether it's my own political career, whether it's padding my own pockets, it's hard to say really because we don't get to look behind that curtain, right? But the reality is, it's true, not only because of Singh, but you saw what Blanchette did with the bloc as soon as Singh backed out.
Right.
Blanchette goes, cool, you can pass these 2 policies and then let's talk. You're good till October.
And that never happened.
It didn't because they were a little too far. I actually think, if I remember correctly, I think it would have been very challenging to pass it in the amount of time he'd given them as well. I don't think you'd be able to,
with retirement, I believe, or
after
something.
Exactly. Anyway, whatever it was that didn't pan out, the point of what I'm trying to make here is because you saw him basically throw the entire country under the bus for 2 policies that would have benefited Quebec. Right? So that's exactly what's happening in this country. Now, when it comes to why Jagmeet is going to continue to support the Liberals is because he's going to go, well, we told you Trudeau was a problem. And we got him to step down because I said I was going to call for a vote of non-confidence. That's what this cuck is going to do, for sure. And I call him a cuck to his face. I don't think he's a tough guy. Anytime you want, pal, let's dance.
That would be interesting.
He remember he was going to square off against that guy in the parking lot, and then he gets into the house and he's like, "Oh, I'm a tough guy." I'm like,
come at me, bro. He said something like that. It's insane. You do that to the wrong person. But then, interesting enough, like me and you probably share the same opinion. That's like, you know how they say, "Make my day." That would be awesome.
Yeah,
right. But what would actually happen though? Because he's getting in your face. You're going to hit a political leader.
I'd probably bait him to hit me first. Exactly. Obviously, I'm not going to start a fight. I got a kid. I want to set a good example. But if someone picks on you, you knock them out.
Yes.
So you just got to see if you can get them to go. I can be pretty persuasive.
Yes, and given the opportunity, I'm sure that would a lot of Canadians. But that guy, I gotta say, he really disappointed me. That guy, he really put his tail between his legs.
He's in it for himself. And I joke.
No, but I even mean the Canadian citizen that when he approached them, he's like, it wasn't me. I didn't say it.
Oh, he was a little bitch.
Yeah, you should have just
just
held your ground.
Yeah, he's a little bitch.
What the hell?
But at the same time, I actually don't think violence is the answer. I'm just kidding. Yeah. Really, I don't. Like, sure, like everybody like daydreams about it once in a while.
Just what we've been through in the past several years as a consequence of this, right?
The reality is it doesn't really solve your problems, and it kind of makes it anyway, that's I think it's fun to joke about, but anyway. Don't get me wrong. If given the opportunity, he's like, "Hey, do you want to step into a ring for charity?" I'm like, "Yes."
100%.
You and Trudeau at the same time. Let's dance.
Yeah,
as long as we double the money for charity, I'm in.
Yeah.
12-ounce gloves. Let's go. Let's go.
We'll do 4 ounces if we have to. Well, let's talk about the Maserati Marxist for a second.
Yeah.
What did he get from that deal?
So
he propped up the government for so long, held Canadians hostage. We didn't want to have.
Well, you have to kind of, so objectively, let's look at some things that happened to the NDP. So they were holding around 20% of the vote, and then through that period, they went down to about 15%. So they lost 25% of their base, and Jagmeet was getting harassed from every angle. So you got to think, okay, what's in it for him? Now, some people argue his pension, which comes through next month, so he'll get that.
But wouldn't he have, Jonathan? Sorry to interrupt you. Wouldn't he have gotten it anyways? Like, there's real different messaging on that. If he maintains leadership of the NDP.
If he maintained leadership, yes. But if there was a vote and he got ousted before February 24th,
which was probably unlikely anyways. Who would they vote in the NDP?
I don't think they're happy with him. I think he's in real danger.
Real?
Yeah,
okay.
I do. But anyway, I think here's the thing. Why take the risk if you're in his shoes?
Right.
But I actually think there's more to it. So if I remember correctly, I think it was about $2.3 million was his pension, which is paid out over many, many years. So it's not a lot of money. It actually wasn't that much money because of the number of years it's paid out on. And if the guy's already in a Maserati, already wearing a fucking $10,000 watch, a $4,000 suit, he doesn't actually need the pension. I think that was something a lot of people were missing. I think he's already doing okay independently. I don't think it's a big deal for him. There was obviously more in this. So when you look at Trudeau's net worth, there are numbers that float around and you see them from time to time. They change and whatever. I think they're often inflated. But the number I can tell you for sure, when he went into office, he declared his net worth at about $1.5 million. Now, the lowest amount that I've seen since, and I think it was in a credible, from a credible organization, like a Forbes or something similar, the lowest I've seen is like 80 plus million.
And that's Trudeau?
Yes.
Okay.
And you think about that, so you go, okay, you make $400,000 a year. How did you manage, even if you got to keep all your money, even if you didn't have to pay taxes, even if you didn't have to spend any of it, that's only $4 million. So now you're worth 5.5. How are you worth over 80? How are you worth north of 80? Some say even 300. I think that's a bit inflated, but.
So as a federal leader, is there any accountability or questioning to justify those earnings?
I don't know. Ask Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah.
She's the best trader of all time. So no, these career politicians have built-in systems so that they are not under scrutiny for these things. So I'll get back to that, but I'll jump over to sort of Jagmeet Singh. What we were talking about is he must be benefiting in a similar way in some fashion.
Right, financially.
There must be some sort of, it's my assumption that there must be pretty significant financial benefits. There must be benefits to power, to access, to all these other things to continue to prop him up. Because all he's done is sully his own name and ruin his own party. So where is the benefit? The benefit must be financial. It must be economic and access.
And selfishly, for sure.
Yeah, those are the only things that make sense to me. So that's kind of what I see from the NDP. Now, with going back to him keeping Carney, if it's Carney that gets in power, it's the same thing. If he can help him through a coalition, well, then Jagmeet maintains power for another 6, 7, 8 months, where he's kind of in this position where he can leverage whatever he's capable of leveraging for a larger benefit, whatever that may be. Again, I don't 100% know, but that's very likely. He's come out with a statement that basically supported Carney. So I think that's what you're going to see. And that's kind of to wrap up, Trudeau's move in proroguing government and resigning. That's what he's done. He's guaranteed Liberal government for the next 10 months. And he's given them a chance to sort of rebrand and rebuild to try to have a run at the election, which I don't think will make a difference.
Okay, so before we talk about the new political leaders, let's talk. So you said March 24th they resumed to Parliament, right?
Yes.
March 31st they got to pass the spending bill, correct?
Is that what it is exactly?
I think it is. It's the budget, or I'll have to.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, everything got moved around because of proroguing government. Yes. Yeah.
So then, what happens after that point? Does the Governor General initiate an election, or does it have to go?
No.
Does Pierre issue a non-confidence, or what?
Well, he can issue a non-confidence, but he won't get the support. What's so weird is that you can have a guy that wasn't really elected by the people be the president, be the prime minister. So that's what is very well likely to happen with Carney. He wasn't really a sitting MP. He wasn't really he was affiliated, but not in the political party. He is very likely to win the Liberal Party vote, and he will be implemented as the prime minister. And then there will not be an election until very likely October. I've seen somebody make an argument that they could stretch it out until 2026, like August, September 2026. I didn't dig in enough as to see how that was possible, but someone made the argument that it was. I don't think they would do that because I think they'd get a lot of trouble from the citizens. I think Canadians would be very upset with that. Mm-hmm. But if you think about it from a Liberal perspective, this actually does make the most sense, right? Because your Liberal Party's in the garbage right now. Their approval rating, I think the number of Canadians that would vote for Liberals right now was 16%. That's even less
They were down to 22%. Trudeau was down to 22%.
Yeah.
Second worst in Canadian history. His own cabinet internally fell to 16%.
Right. There was something about the number of Canadians that would vote for the Liberal Party that I read that was in that same range. So you think about it, you're like, no one really wants to vote for the Liberals right now. Okay, so if I run the Liberal Party, what do I have to do? Well, I have to try to rebuild some brand equity. And the best opportunity for me to do that is when I'm in power, because I can actually change policy.
Yes, it makes sense.
Because otherwise, if Pierre Poilievre's in and he's moving the needle in the right direction, the Liberals don't start gaining any momentum. So you get someone like Carney in, and then you let him start maybe reversing some policy, maybe neutralizing a few things, maybe finding his way back to the center. Because if he does, then he gets all those people that had just shifted to the right. He gets all those people back on board. He says, I'm a new guy. I've got new ideas, fresh perspective, blah, 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 blah. Even though he's responsible for a lot of what's happened. But that's what he says. And he's got 8 months to implement policy to try to get those people back on board. So maybe it's a race. Maybe the Liberals become the official opposition again. Maybe, regardless how you look at it, it's their best opportunity to rebuild brand equity. Now, I don't think there's a chance in hell that they win. I think that whoever gets voted in now, whether it's Carney or Freeland, they will be Kim Campbell, as I like to say. Kim Campbell, if you remember, was the prime minister that was basically elected after Mulroney stepped down in the 90s, early 90s. It might have been 90. I think it was early. Anyway, she lasted about the same amount of time, like 6-8 months, walloped in an election by Chrétien, who then went on to lead for a very, very long time. So I think you're going to see the same thing, but from a strategic perspective, the Liberals are doing what makes the most sense.
Right. So as a new Liberal leader, and the interesting thing too, I read somewhere that the people that can vote for the Liberal Party don't have to be citizens of Canada. Is that true?
So this was true. So there's a couple things. I looked into this. This is actually true for all parties. So I was under the impression that it was. Here's what I believed. I believed that you had to pay no money to join the Liberal Party, and you did not have to be a Canadian citizen. You could be a student, you could be a non-permanent, you could be on fucking vacation, it seemed like. And And then I was under the impression that the Conservatives were a fee to join, and you had to be a citizen or a non-permanent resident. Pardon me, or a permanent resident, rather. And the NDP was similar to the Liberals, but you had to pay money to join. So at least there was the barrier to entry.
Well, there's a membership fee for the Conservative Party.
Yes,
right?
correct. Yes, and for the NDP, just not the Liberals. So I was under the impression that that's what it was. Apparently, none of them have any real restrictions about citizenship. The Conservatives or the NDP or the Liberals. Now, the Liberals are still in the doghouse because they don't charge a fee. So you can be joining like thousands of kids, whether they're from China, India, whatever,
right.
Just signing them up, forging documents. This is what happened with Han Dong in one of the ridings in Don Valley.
Right.
So there are these issues that pop up. However, it's my understanding that about a week ago, the Liberal Party decided to tighten up their rules. So if you're already a member, you're a member. But for new members, you have to be a resident or a permanent resident. So from my understanding, they did close that loop because they received a lot of trouble for it. So despite the mess they've caused in the past, at least it seems like they're trying to make that positive change.
Yeah, well, I think they pretty much have no choice. They need to start. They need to start closing some loose ends for sure.
Yeah.
So you think most likely, I would say Mark Carney, Chrystia Freeland, most likely the replacement of Trudeau.
It's one of those two for sure. I think it's interesting. A lot of people would suggest Freeland, and here's why I don't think so. Mm-hmm. For starters, she's been the right-hand woman of Trudeau for the last several years. And she's been responsible, or in part responsible, for 90+% of the decisions that have been made. So how can you have distaste for Trudeau's policies and then vote this woman in who just turned her back on him the other day? Doesn't really make sense, especially the Freedom Convoy shit with her laughing at people on TV and freezing bank accounts and all the, I just can't. I hope people remember that. The other reason I don't think she's going to get in is because I believe, and I'm sure you guys feel the same way, is that there's someone above Trudeau that is sort of moving, choosing the direction and making decisions. It's the people in his cabinet. It's not just, they don't have to be elected, but it's definitely not him. He's not the only guy doing this. So she must have pissed all them off. Because she went rogue that day when she was supposed to introduce the budget by saying, "Oh, we kind of fucked up here. It's 62 billion.
Same day.
It's 62 billion." And in fact, they actually cut the revenue by 5 billion, so it was actually 67 billion.
What, the deficit or
So they cut the revenue. So when they tell you the deficit, they go, "Here's how much we're going to spend. Here's how much revenue we're going to make." So the revenue's here. This is what we're going to spend. So they said the deficit is going to be 40 billion, right? But what they did was they go, "Well, it's going to be 62. Oh, we're also losing 5 billion in revenue." They just kept that part quiet. So it was actually now a gap of 67 billion.
Oh, interesting.
Well, you got to cover the gap of the revenue you didn't make.
Yeah.
Of course. So it was actually 67, which is a wild amount of money.
That's crazy.
So she decides not to introduce this budget and kind of fall on the sword, I think, so to speak. So she probably talked to a few MPs and were like, "Hey, I'm going to generate some support here. I'm turning on this motherfucker. Let's go." But the people that make the decisions that are in Trudeau's cabinet and above Trudeau, they can't be a fan of this. She threw a wrench in the gears because that's actually what ultimately led to this whole cascading effect of him resigning, right? So I imagine she doesn't have support from the people that are high up in the party, and anybody who's a Canadian or anybody in the Liberal Party has to go, she's been there the whole time. So how does she possibly win? Now, Mark Carney's an absolute snake in a nicer suit, but I still think he's going to win.
Yeah. It's interesting because I don't know how any Canadian citizen can look at the Liberal Party and, like you said, separate any of these new candidates who ultimately supported Trudeau in the 9 years that he destroyed the country, supported him, and then go, "Oh, well, this is a refreshing new political leader." How do you do that? How do you make that distinction? They're the same, but different.
It's delusion. So here's the problem. It's blind loyalty to a party. It's like blind loyalty maybe to a religion or something else, you know.
Fair
you ever
enough.
have conversations with people about religion, and if I have anything that I want to challenge them, I'll often say, "Hey, do you have blind faith to your religion and these ideas?" And if they say yes, I go, "Okay, cool." There's no conversation to be had. Because if you're not willing to use maybe the set of tools that you and I might consider like logic, and that's okay if you don't. I don't care if you do. That's your own prerogative. But if you're not willing to use those tools, if we're not playing on equal ground here, I'm not going to bother with the conversation. Mm-hmm. So you get the same thing in political parties. But here's the thing that I would like to sort of warn people about when it becomes, here's the thing that I would like to warn people about when it comes to political allegiance. Now, in a democracy, why do we have different parties win every 4 or 5 years? Why? It's because the people in charge are doing a poor job. So what happens are the people that voted for them last time change their minds and vote for the other party. It's the very nature of democracy. You vote for the party that's doing the best for you.
Correct.
Or will do the best for the country. People ask me if I'm conservative or Republican. I am not. I'm politically agnostic. It depends on what needs to be done at that time in that country and ultimately what's important to you. right? Like, I can't tell you why you should vote for somebody, but you should know. You should know why. But what happens with this cohort of people, 10, 20, 30%, they're just, no matter what, they vote liberal. No matter what, they vote conservative. They don't consider the things that I just mentioned. That is a problem. You are not actively participating in democracy when you do that. You're just being an idiot.
It's similar to religion in a way. A lot of the ideological stance that they take on the liberal side of things nowadays, which they're not really liberal anymore. They've been taken over by like radical socialists, it seems. It's somewhat a religious experience almost. Like they're binded to it in a religious way.
I think so. They've done a really good job of tying these cultural, ideological causes into their political party, like all this trans stuff. And it's actually created a religion. It's created like this cult where people are like afraid to step out of line. They're afraid to say the wrong thing. But here's the problem with this religion. You can't repent and be let back in. This is why it's destined to fail. If I'm a Christian and I repent and I apologize, I admit my sins, and you go, okay, brother, come back in, everything's fine. That's how the religion works. I'm not religious, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the general principle, right? Mm-hmm. But these other ones, if you denounce trans anything for any reason whatsoever, you are cast out and you are never allowed back in. In fact, 3-4 years ago, cancel culture would be, they would like flies on shit. You know what I mean? You had no chance. You're canceled. You could lose your job. You could lose your spouse. You're kicked off social media. So that is not how an effective religion stays alive. So this will fail. But to your point, that's exactly what it's become.
Yeah, and you know what, the optimism, I'll give the optimistic side now. We saw in the States, which we'll talk about shortly too, there was an overwhelming mandate of support for Trump. A lot of independents and people that were agnostic or apolitical came out and voted in droves. I think the same thing's happening in Canada too. That sort of the people that are obsessed or committed to voting liberal is a little bit changing too, with the federal support, with the Conservatives being 44 to 49%, like overwhelming support nationally.
Yes.
So they're starting to shift. And a lot of those people are maybe people that never voted before or people that voted liberal before, but they're reasonable people.
Yes. Yeah, I think, like I said, I think that most people are reasonable. I think it's different in America than it is in Canada. Okay,
right.
So in America, you've got two-party system. So what happens is they go in polar opposites. If the left goes further left, the right goes further right. So remember when they're like, it was all this trans ideology shit was allowed in schools. So then some U.S. states, some Republican states were like putting like the 10 Commandments in school.
I saw that.
Right. So to my point, they just go deep. They go, you're going to go over there? Well, I'm going way the fuck over there then. So what happens when this starts to happen in society, what you get is a very wide Overton window. The Overton window is the spectrum of acceptable political speech, right? So that is things that a politician can grab a hold of that's happening in society, and they can use that as some idea for policy or to build themselves up or just have a discussion because they're things that we want to change. So in America, they've got a very, very, very wide Overton window, but they've also got polar opposites in their parties. People don't really switch sides as much down there, right? Because it's a long chasm to cross. That's the reality, because the parties they're so entrenched in their ideas down there. Now, what's happened, I will say the Democrats did go a little socialist, a little crazy. The Republicans did pick up some of their ideas, which is why some great Democrats shifted over. But what you just saw, this monumental shift, is something you don't see often in history, and you won't see for a long time in the States. That's not how their politics work. Mm-hmm. So you're going to see a strong Republican leader, I think, for 8 to 12 years down there right now. Anyway, in Canada, what happens is our parties are magnetized, right? So the party in power is the one that moves the needle. So right now, the Liberals are in power. And what I mean by magnetized is this. Every party has their position. If the Liberals move further left, the NDP have to become socialists or communists, and the Conservatives have to force themselves into the middle. They can't really be further right anymore. Otherwise, you start losing people on the fence. So what that creates is a narrow Overton window. So you can't have guys like Maxime Bernier for I think it was the PPC, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, you can't have guys like him talk about ideas that Canadians would say are radical because it's way too far away from these other parties, right? So even though Poilievre may do things that are more conservative when he's talking more like a liberal from the 90s because that's where the Overton window has shifted. But it makes it easier for people to switch parties because they're a lot more closely linked in what they're trying to accomplish. That's why in Canada, when you have a multi-party system, not just a two-party system, that's why you see these shifts happen a little easier in our country.
The gaps are a little bit closer.
Exactly. So it's a step, not a 10-mile 10-mile gap to cross.
Well, let's talk about the official opposition. Let's talk about Pierre Poilievre. What are your thoughts on him and his mission, and can he deliver in the coming years if he does win, which it seems he might, the election?
I don't want to seem overly optimistic in a politician.
Okay.
But I am pretty optimistic in this guy. I've met Pierre. He's a no bullshit. I met him through his financial mentor. So I met him in a setting where their guard was down and the character wasn't on. I really liked him. And so far what he's done, I think a lot of people will say, well, all he's doing is playing this popularity contest. I say, okay, what would you rather have him do right now? Because you got to realize politics are played in phases. Right now, if he starts going, well, I'm going to do this as my policy, and that's my policy, and this is my policy for this, well, the election's not for another 10 months. How much of that do you remember? Not very much.
He does deliver a fair amount on his policies and his missions, and I think he's clear on it.
I think he delivers opposition to what's happening. I think that's what he delivers. Okay. Because it's very easy to say, I'm going to repeal that. I'm going to stop this. Right. I'm going to get rid of the capital gains tax. That thing's fucking insane. So he does that. Yeah. He doesn't go deep on policy. What he does is he vilifies liberal policy because it's insane. But what he's doing for the most part is winning a popularity contest, because that is a big part of politics, unfortunately. And 6 months out or 3 months out, he's going to focus more on policy. That is just sort of the right path to follow when you want to become a successful politician. So I think he's doing a reasonable job on that, but I think that's why people are on the left. I think that's why that's the only ammo they have. Yeah, and I wanted to dispel that a little bit, to be like, we don't know his policy. You know, he just says this and this. He's just inflammatory in the House, and I'm just like, that's the phase we're in, guys. You got to understand, Trump opened up a new world of politics, and I think Pierre Poilievre is doing a really good job with it. Now, some of the downsides, I would say, career politician, a bit more war hawkish than I would like, a little more support for the war in Ukraine and Israel than I would like to see. But he has also talked about curbing foreign spending. So a little contradictory. We'll see how that plays out. But in terms of his policy, here's what I'll say. His first 4 years are going to be easy if he can control the Senate, right? Because the Senate has been 86% appointed by Trudeau. So it's very liberal. And it's not nonpartisan like he says. That's fucking bullshit.
That's bullshit. No.
100%. So you look at the last 3 people that were appointed. Two of the last 3 were liberal political members, like MPs or an MLA or an MPP. They had official political positions as liberals. So don't tell me this is nonpartisan. Or like someone else that gets in was his campaign manager. Or another woman got $40 million from the liberal government to spearhead some LGBTQ thing. Don't tell me that they're nonpartisan. It's bullshit. So you have a very left-leaning Senate. So if he can control the Senate, if he can't, I hope he staggers. If he can't, I hope he goes into the Constitution. Is that what it is in Canada?
How would he control the Senate if it's overwhelmingly like liberal? Like people will say it's not, it's a bipartisan, but it is. There, like you said, how would he control that?
There are some things that make it challenging because of the documents that make Canada what it is. If you're not able to go in and change any of the official documents in Canada, it's going to be difficult to actually. So my idea, let me just say, is to do staggered elections and elect all your senators. There's no more appointments.
Similar to the way the U.S.
Yes, they've got way too much power. If they can ultimately, so if you want to pass something, you need the Senate. If you want to repeal something, you need the Senate. If you want to change something, you need the Senate's approval. So they are basically another group of MPs, essentially, for lack of a better way of looking at it. Why on God's earth should they be appointed by a prime minister? It makes no sense at all.
Yeah, it should be elected by the people.
100%. So I have a big problem with how that works.
And how about the governor general's not elected by the people either?
No, they're appointed, but they're kind of just a figurehead. They just kind of do what they're told. Right. They just kind of do what they're told.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're pretty insignificant. People get a little upset because they look at that as a safety measure, but effectively they just do nothing but what they're told. They're a figurehead for the most part. So anyway, while Poilievre's in, if he can sort of see his way through the Senate, or they see things more reasonably, all he has to do in his first 4 years is repeal things. You don't really need to say a lot of new stuff. Repeal all the censorship stuff. Repeal the News Act. Repeal Bill C-11.
Bill C-18, Bill C-75,
yeah,
Bill C-69.
Yeah, the bail reform one, C-5, C-75. Basically repeal anything that the Liberals put through over the last at least 5 years, I would be saying, is on the chopping block. Curb immigration and find a way to increase your capacity to build homes, which is all pretty easy stuff.
Some of the things that Pierre said is he wants smaller government, he wants to cut the bureaucracy, cut foreign aid, cut corporate welfare and large corporations, use the savings to bring down the deficit, which, like you said, is close to $70 million.
Yes.
Bring down the taxes, unleash the free enterprise system, repeal C-69, which was the anti-energy law. That's one of them amongst the other ones.
That's huge for
Restore
Canada.
The oil and gas gas industry, cut government spending, axe the carbon tax, stops printing money, incentivize the municipalities to speed up the permits, which will help with the housing
so
crisis.
they wouldn't get their funding if they didn't meet the threshold and et cetera. And then,
so that's tangible stuff that you can look at and be like, okay, that's a plan.
so if he does all that, even if he does half of that, he gets another term for sure.
Yes,
right.
yes.
So I mean, who could say that any of that's a bad idea? And if they do say which one's bad,
Well, the
and
energy
why?
one, the climate
Why?
people will
What?
say.
Okay, no, I would challenge that. So Pierre says right now we have the fifth largest reserve of natural gas. So from my understanding, actually, according to recent reports, we have the most.
Okay.
So we have the most LNG in the world. We have enough to power the world for 209 years. Okay, so they're saying, well, you can't pull that out because of our climate agenda. Okay, so if we are responsible for 1.5% of emissions, right, and we don't want to pull out any natural gas. Well, first of all, natural gas is at least 50% better than using oil. Okay, so there's an improvement. But forget about using it here. You ship it off to the countries that have already asked for it. Japan, Germany, France. You just ship it off to Europe. Now, the net positive from just shipping our natural gas to these countries and them using that instead of the current energy instead of using the current sources for their energy, it would actually be a bigger improvement on the global environmental impact. So if you offshored our natural gas, you would actually make a more significant impact than if you left it in the ground.
Yes, and why would we not want to just use our own resources? Canada's rich in resources. Like we look at
probably the richest, one of the richest in the world.
We look at all the things that Canada has.
Apparently, Russia's richer, but
third biggest supply of oil, fifth biggest supply of natural gas, biggest supply of uranium, fifth biggest supply of lithium.
We have a lot. We have a lot of minerals, a lot of other things we could be offshoring here, man. Like our energy specifically. So third in oil, and I would argue first in natural gas. So when you look at that alone, it's like, why aren't we leveraging these resources?
Yeah.
Why are we not? We're not even. I forget the name of what it's called when you take the oil and refining it. So we're not even really refining most of our oil, like only 15-20%. So we're selling it cheap to the States, then buying it back for this at a significant delta.
And that's under the guise of environmental issues?
Yes. So all these things are. That's why they're capping all this stuff because of environment. But my point is, if we're really worried about the environment is global. So if we would make a net improvement, a net positive impact on the global stage in the environment, if we actually offshored our natural gas, how can you say then we leave it in the ground? So it's better for our economy. It's better for communities. It creates jobs. It gets us out of debt. It makes Canada a powerhouse in the world. Yeah. And we actually decrease the carbon footprint around the world. Show me the negative.
Honestly, Jonathan, if he's able to at least move the needle on that standpoint, on the oil and gas industry, I think that really brings down a lot of things like inflation, grocery costs, and just utilizing the resources that we have. I think Canada does a lot better.
100%.
You look at Canada, I think that's optimism. And we were talking about Mark Carney here before we transition to the next topic here. We were talking about Mark Carney. He supported Trudeau in his anti-energy laws and stuff, and then in his business invested millions or billions of dollars elsewhere, like in Brazil and some other places.
The UAE.
The UAE. That's kind of, if you care about the environment, why aren't you consistent across the board?
Yeah, his argument is, well, we should be on the forefront of it. That's exactly. He's showing you who he is. So
exactly.
I have this idea where if people show you who they are, trust them to be who they are.
Beautifully said.
So there you go. It's right there. It's already written on the wall, guys.
Beautifully said. But lastly, before we kind of transition here, I want to talk about the establishment a little bit. Do you think there's a consensus amongst the West, especially following COVID? I think there's a stat that every leader that was in charge during COVID has lost their given election. Biden, Trudeau, and other leaders among the world because of the government overreach and things they sort of engaged with. Do you think there's this consensus of like anti-establishment throughout the West right now?
Oh yeah, I think you're seeing it in a lot of parts of the world. I think you're right. Almost every leader was ousted. What's interesting is it wasn't even left and right. So there was conservative rule in England, the UK, for a very, very long time, 10, 12 years. But they're gone now. Now you got the Labour Party, which is wildly left. But the thing is, people just want to change. They felt so duped. They felt so hard done by, right? So yeah, people just want to change. I think there is a bit of an anti-establishment thing. But here's the challenge I have right now. So it's something I've coined the democracy dilemma. 500 years ago or more, we lived in a time where violence was acceptable to overthrow your leader. Why was violence acceptable? Because the leader used violence to keep you in line. That was kind of that was what they traded in. That was you live in fear because if you fuck over the king, he's going to cut your head off and take all your stuff. You go, okay, I'm going to be a good boy. Same goes for the king though, because if he can do it, people go, well then I can use those tools. So if enough people were upset, you get King Henry to off goes your head. I'm not saying that's the best solution. What I'm saying is it was acceptable back then. Now we live in a society where we are told that democracy works and we can vote our way out of these problems, right? So here's the dilemma. I'm concerned, and we're going to find out in the next 4 to 5 years whether I'm right or wrong. Not even right or wrong, what happens. I don't actually have an opinion on it. I'm concerned that democracy has been compromised. So we are told that we can vote our way out of a problem, right? So here's democracy down here. There's institutional democracy, and then there's democracy within society. The problem is we vote in this level thinking we can make a difference, but both leaders are part of institutional democracy. You're basically voting for one wing of the same bird. It doesn't really make a difference. Two puppets, same puppeteer. So we are told in society, hey, things will get better. You just have to vote your way out of these problems. But it doesn't get any better because they've compromised the system that they say, this is the dilemma, the system that they say will get us out of this. So we've got this, we're in this really weird time right now where, like you said, all around the world, people are voting in new parties to see if it works. Is it working in the UK? Not really. It's actually getting worse. So is it going to work in the United States? I hope so. I'll tell you why I hope so is because Trump won the popular vote, which is just fun. He's got the House. He's got Congress. Pardon me. He's got the Congress. He's got the Senate. He's got the White House. He's got the Supreme Court. He has support of the entrepreneur community. Everything's kind of moving in his direction. He's already been in the White House. He's not going to get elected again after this. So he's pretty much in the best position that any political leader could be in to fix things and to correct course, to show us if democracy still actually works. Because he's not part of the institution. He's down here with us. So we have the next 4 to 5 years, and I'm hoping that Poilievre is in the same thing, where Poilievre's not up here, that he's down here with us, and he can actually make change. Because if these guys can't make change, if the same thing happens in the States that's happening in the UK, I know it won't be the exact same, but you know what I mean? If the same thing happens in Canada, we have a real problem on our hands. Because what that means is that democracy doesn't work. That's sort of the dilemma here is, does this system effectively work anymore, or has it been so compromised that we're just fooled into thinking it does? Mm-hmm. And I want to believe that it does work, and I want to believe that Trump and I want to believe that Poilievre are the right people to start correcting course, but I don't know because one of them's just starting his term, and the other one hopefully will be starting it within about a year. Mm-hmm. And I guess we'll find out from that point. I really don't know.
And that's the reason why I asked you, perfect segue to what I want to talk about with Trump and the mandate that we saw in the United States. The reason I ask you is because Trump isn't an establishment politician. He's amongst the very few, if not the only one that I think I can remember being a real not establishment politician, showing us the other side of the coin and that's one of the reasons why they hated him. To see what he's been through, literally, like people forget, Jonathan, he almost got killed on national TV.
Yeah.
And then we stopped talking about it. Yeah, like twice. Yeah. Like what the hell? And then you listen to the media, the pre-polling, he's a Nazi, he's this, all that fake news, so to speak, up until that point, and then you sort of peel that back, and then the truth comes out, and he wins the popular vote, he wins this, et cetera, et cetera. It's amazing to see, and it's a testament to maybe where we're heading. And so that's sort of where I asked, can Pierre emulate the same thing?
I hope so. So I also mentioned that they weaponized the judicial system against Trump pretty heavily too,
right?
Which is scary. That's pretty crazy. That shows you that their democracy is in real trouble, because if your judicial system and your political system are not separate, that they're very much in bed with one another, which we know they are to a degree.
Definitely.
But if they're that deeply in bed, that's banana republic shit. Like, that's the opposition leader who most people in the country wanted to see become the next president. They're trying to throw him in jail.
Yeah, throw him in jail, almost got killed, cancel him, removed him from Twitter.
That is banana republic shit. So they are in trouble. That's why they're the most interesting case study to me, because they need the most radical change to correct course right now. I would say optically, maybe not foundationally. Canada's pretty broken too, especially when you take into consideration the economics. Can Pierre do the same thing? Again, we have this problem of understanding whether or not the Senate is going to is going to get in his way.
We have to stay politically engaged. That was what I watched the conversation with him and Jordan Peterson. That was one of the things he said. We need to stay politically engaged.
Like once I get in, it doesn't mean everybody cheers and goes home. It's like everybody keep putting their foot on the gas. So I think that's very important. Let's put it this way. I think he's going to give us the best chance. He's going to give us the best chance to create a similar outcome in this country in what Canadians would deem acceptable, because we're not we're not America.
Yes.
You know, gay rights, the gay rights really aren't on the table there either. But abortion, not on the table here. There's things on the table there that aren't on the table here. We play a bit of a different game, right? So when people say, oh, well, I want it to be just like that, it's not going to be just like that. But our version of that, I'd say he's our best chance.
Fair enough.
And then we just kind of go from there, and we see what the will of the people is like. If they want to maintain that and continue voting in people that will continue doing the same things, we go from there. But if not, then I'm of the mind that I have to pick up my family and go somewhere else. Now, the problem is I don't know what's going to be happening in America at that time. I don't know what's going to be happening around the world, man.
Much is changing. Yeah.
This whole democracy dilemma for me is the issue, because if democracy is compromised everywhere, then it doesn't really matter where you go. How do you find your utopia, which I know it doesn't exist, but how do you find this space where you go to a place that's got small government? Maybe you go to an island. I moved back to the Cayman Islands, maybe Costa Rica. Sure, there's some stuff happening in Costa Rica. There's some gangs and shit, nothing crazy, but a little bit. Cayman's pretty safe, but they're still under British rule. So sometimes they do some wacky shit, but they're pretty good because they're so small. It's otherwise, what do you do? Where do you go? And this is this weird thing. It's this not fear that I have, but something I'm constantly paying attention to that I'm waiting to sort of unfold over the next 4 to 5 years. Where is the safe space for people like us in the world? Can Canada become that safe space again? And I mean, safe space, you know what I mean? Where we know how to use, we give entrepreneurs opportunities. We actually protect free speech. Our democracy actually works. We are actually leveraging our natural resources to build our economy. We're giving people opportunities to have a living wage so that this country starts rebuilding itself in a positive way and crime rates go down and we curb immigration so the country can be safer again. Are we going to do these things?
Right.
I hope that we do, and I hope Canada becomes great again.
Yes, and you know what? I'm of the same opinion. I'm very optimistic with Pierre's leadership. But I'm interested to ask, how do you think, because so much has happened since Trump came out and he issued some warnings about tariffs and stuff, so maybe we can unpack here before we wrap up. But how do you think Pierre and Trump, we're at to being a conservative leader in Canada and a Republican leader in the United States, which that hasn't happened since I think 06, 08 with Bush and who was it? Harper. Yeah, exactly. So how do you think Pierre and Trump leadership pair up together?
Well, it's interesting. So Jamil Javani is a new conservative MP, and he's really good buddies with J.D. Vance.
Interesting.
Yes. So he's really close with Pierre Poilievre, and J.D. Vance obviously is the VP. So we got a backdoor relationship that's already kind of working itself out. Someone actually made the argument to me the other day that one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons they're really pushing this tariff thing on Canada was to disrupt the leadership, to try to move the needle on getting a conservative government in.
Well, one of the things that Trump said is, he clean up your border. I'm going to issue you guys, I am going to give you, there's going to be tariffs oncoming. And what happened shortly after? The border started getting cleaned up. Of course.
He's done a lot, even though he's not president yet. It's kind of interesting. I'm not really sure how this tariff game plays out. I made the argument the other day on our podcast that no one really knows because the fight hasn't started yet. All we know is they've got the pound for pound number one 170-pound fighter in the world. That's who they got. So we got to put in our best 170er. That's what we have to do. And then we got to see how that fight starts. Because everyone's like, oh, Canada's going to get crushed. They should just bend over and take it. No, they should do this. They should do that. There's a lot of reasons why we are in this situation. One of them is because we didn't leverage our natural resources effectively. Exactly. So we are in a vulnerable position. But you still have to put your guy in there, start the fight, and see how it goes. Because we just don't know how the rest of this tariff conversation is going to unfold. We really don't.
So do you think friend or foe, Pierre Poilievre and Trump?
Friends. Yeah. Hundo. Yes. Look, I think about this in terms of, I don't know how far ahead these guys are, but the global GDP is going to start to shrink, adjusted for inflation, because our population is going to start decreasing. Definitely the people that are net positive on GDP, that is a declining population. So the world's not growing as quickly anymore. And the way that you're going to be able to secure your own economy is through a little more economic nationalism, doing your own domestic production, manufacturing, stuff like this. And that's not to say only, I'm not saying only do this, but you're going to have to limit globalism a little bit. You're going to have to stop maybe working, you're seeing this sort of East and West become a deeper divide in the world. You're looking at your BRICS nations and stuff like this. So if you look 10 years down the road, the economy is not going to look the same as it did 10 years ago. We're not going to have this robust, globalized economy where it's just not going to work like this. If you want to have a strong economy and longevity in your economy and good jobs for your people, I believe you have to limit your trading partners a little bit and do a lot more domestic production and manufacturing, which will rework your own economics effectively. So you think about that plan and you go, okay, where's the most powerful corridor in the world then? Really? Well, I would suggest that it is North America. I would say that it's Mexico, which has become like America's number one trading partner. Now they have cheaper labor than China. I would say, obviously, America is the powerhouse, and Canada has all the natural resources, and we're all landlocked. This is the best. This is maybe why Trump's trying to make this stupid move on Canada and Greenland, which is fucking stupid, but whatever. But if you look at the future, you look at what that looks like. These are the groups that you want to be working together to have a very strong and prosperous future where you have domestic manufacturing and production across all sectors of the market, at least within these three countries. So you don't need to go anywhere else. You can create an economy just right here. Now, that is a very rudimentary way of looking at it. It's more complex. We have Japan as a partner and Europe and all these other things. But the reason I'm sort of simplifying it is to help people understand why I think it's so important that Canada and America start getting along a little better and find a way to work together long term, because I think it's important for the future of our economy.
Essentially, they'll do good business.
Yes.
That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, in short, yes.
Yeah, I think Trump and Pierre pair well. I think that's gonna do both of us good, because, like you said, we got a lot to offer. They got a lot to offer.
Yes.
We can do good business, and the future kind of looks bright on that front. So let's talk a little bit about Meta, because during your time throughout COVID, I'm sure you experienced censorship, and recently Mark Zuckerberg did Joe Rogan, and he issued a pivot in his business,
Yes.
which gives me an idea. Was it the free market that sort of stimulated change, or was it Trump going into office that made him stimulate change?
It was Trump going into office. I think that he had a reasonable moral compass, but I don't think he had the individual will to push back against the system. So I think he begrudgingly did it. Elon Musk put himself in a fuck you position first, then bought Twitter. He's like, what are you guys going to do? I'm too powerful. I'm too big.
Which was a big cultural shift.
Huge.
People underestimate that. That was a big shift in our culture.
Him doing that, he's not the only reason that Trump's in power, but without him buying Twitter, turning it into X, I don't think it happens. I really don't. I think that social media is completely compromised, because that was the goal of these government agencies, and obviously they did it to Zuckerberg, right? Now, there's a couple things I would say. From the outside looking in, it's very easy to say, like, hey, Zuckerberg started doing jiu-jitsu, got his body right, got his mind right, has a better or stronger moral compass, feels like a stronger, more alpha character in life, which I think is important. So prior to that, I think he would have bent at the government's will a lot easier. So we can sit here and give him shit for doing this before. However, we don't know if they threatened him with some significant things. They could have been like, we'll throw you in jail for 50 years. We don't know. We don't know if they're like, we will plant stuff inside your company and we will bury you. We don't know.
Well, they were calling him yelling and swearing.
Obviously, this is just a theory. I have no idea.
Correct.
But we don't know, because when they're in power, you saw how they weaponized the system against Trump. So when these people were in power, they could push all the buttons they wanted, and they want to maintain power. How crazy are they willing to be against a machine that is probably the most significant piece of technology that is fighting against them? They will do anything. So they could have easily gone to him like, dude, you will end up in a box. You're going to do it. You're told. So we sit here and go, yeah, he was kind of being a bitch. Maybe it was for his own longevity. I don't know. Now, from the outside looking in, I'm like, yeah, he was kind of a bitch, and now he switched because Trump's in power. I think he's always had a reasonable moral compass, but didn't have the will to fight back. That's what I think. However, if the reason he didn't do it was that significant, like we'll end your life, I get it. I get it.
Well, they definitely put an immense amount of pressure on him.
Yes.
To definitely, they called him, like you said, they called him and they intervened with quite a bit of censorship on during that time, which
Yes.
I'm sure you experienced some of that as well.
Yep.
And it's just like looking back, it's like this is what we were freaking out about the whole time. People were attributing you to be a conspiracy theorist if you disagreed, and people would censor those exact positions that you may have, and then
Yes.
they were justifying. Biden administration was calling and basically telling them, you must remove this, you must remove that, really intervening in a way you've never seen.
Crazy.
It's
This is the problem with
insane.
censorship. This is the problem with censorship is anytime you censor things, one group of people decide what's right and wrong.
Yeah.
End of story.
Yeah.
It is not the way in any democracy. If you have an idea and people support it, then maybe it's a good idea. If someone thinks they've got a better one, go test it in the public and let's see how it fares.
Yep.
That's how democracy works. That's how free speech, that's how all this stuff has to work. They started censoring things. That never ends well. That always ends up in autocracy every time.
And capitalism wins again. I'll tell you that, because X became a free speech platform. The prosperity of that company grew. Meta looks at that and goes, we're not doing as well as we should be.
Yes.
let's adjust, and now we're going to remove fact checkers. But who is fact checkers? Who are the fact checkers? Like really, they're third party fact checkers.
Yes,
and it's basically they're ideologically driven. Yes, and they're trying to change depending on what they believe, especially through COVID. Right,
100%.
So the free market wins again because X community notes. We like that idea. We're doing the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think capitalism, by and large, does work if you let it do its thing. If there's no government intervention, if there's no corporate welfare, if there's none of this nonsense, it actually works pretty well. You know what I mean? It's just governments get involved because that's how they can control society, more so than just what it looks like they can control. Like you said, it looks like the Republicans are going to push away from that, minimize government, minimize control, kind of unleash capitalism again the right way, which is, I think, the benefit of conservatives and Republicans. So I'm hopeful we see the same thing here. Canada's a little more socially driven in general. It's just sort of how our system's always worked. So you can expect it to be a little tighter, but we need opportunity again. You know what I mean? It's like, I think 25% of people in Canada are now employed by the government or some sort of government agency at this point, an extension of. You can't run a society like that.
You know what changes on the horizon, like just sort of encapsulating the conversation that we had today, changes on the horizon, I think, for Canada in particular. And one of the things I often discuss with my guests, especially Canadians, is their pride in Canada. So I've asked this before. I'm going to ask you, are you proud to be Canadian?
That's an interesting question. So I think the problem with patriotism as a foundational kind of concept is that you believe your country's better because you were born there. A bit flawed, right? The idea of it is a bit flawed. Am I proud to be a part of Canada? Yes. And in a lot of ways, I am. I don't think that one man as a human wrecking ball should take that away from every Canadian. Am I proud to see where Canada's at today? No, I'm not. No, definitely not. Do I think it can be repaired and become a thriving, strong community at large again? I do. I'm hopeful. But I will say this. Patriotism's become a much less significant component of my life. I don't really think about being Canadian or being in Canada as part of my long-term equation anymore. If it works out, that's great. I got family, I got friends, I have a foundation, I've got a history here, businesses, all that stuff. But if it doesn't, I'm not going to lose any part of my identity. I'm not going to lose any part of my plan. I'm just going to go do it somewhere else where the grass is greener because I'm the guy that's going to water it. So if this country becomes a bigger hindrance over time and it does not give us an opportunity to even grow grass, why would we stay here anymore, right? So it's really diminished in terms of the weight I put on it, but I'm still proud.
I love it, man. Of course, I knew your answer was going to be tremendous. And there's no better way to end off the conversation, man. It's always a fucking pleasure to talk with you, and I really appreciate your time. I have a final segment on Couple Casuals Podcast, which I call Salute. I give an opportunity to the guest to end us off with maybe a message, a thought, words of whatever you got.
Yeah, what I would say is this. We've gone through the last 10 years in Canada sort of as a victim of circumstance. But the reality is that we are not a victim of circumstance. We've let these things happen. So what happens in politics or what happens in society is the rest of us go about our lives like nothing matters. We just do our daily schedule. And then all of a sudden these policies get put into place that we find very egregious. Pick whichever one you like. It's because those people were working while we were sleeping. They had an agenda that we weren't aware of, and they were on it all the time, and they were successful. Whether it's, letting men play women's sports, whether it's censorship, whether it's bail reform. They were working on these things while we didn't know, and now we're just having to deal with the results of these terrible policies. So my point is this. Let that be a lesson to all of us. We're the ones that are in power, but we can't actually take our foot off the gas. We have to be active on our side as well all the time. Try to understand what's going to make Canada great and try to participate in it, and do not take your foot off the gas. This is now a part of your life. 10%, 5%, whatever you can afford, 20%, even more. It has to go towards making Canada a great country. Otherwise, you will continue to be a victim of circumstance. So I just want people to know that we are where we are because we let it happen, but we can go where we want to go as long as we get back in the driver's seat.
Jonathan Harvey, always a pleasure. Tremendous answer.
Thanks,
I appreciate you. I appreciate your time.
Thanks,
I look forward to seeing what's coming next because I know there's a lot of good things coming next, man.
A lot on the go, pal.
One of the good guys. Keep at it. I
Thanks,
appreciate
man.
it. Appreciate all you guys. Until next time, loving nobody else. Ciao.